Okay, so this is the fourth video lecture, and we are continuing to talk about cognitive development of preschool children. The last slide, I spent a lot of time talking about theory of mind, and then we talked about memory, and I sort of left off emphasizing the role of interaction, of talking to kids, to talking to kids and giving them words, and all of this enables them to anchor the new information to some other memory that we hope, will still be there down the road. But I kind of want to continue with this theme of the importance of social interaction. And specifically, maybe you remember back from chapter 1, there was a fella, Vygotsky, and Vygotsky's theory, which was basically we learn about the world through because we interact with others. And so I kind of want to carry on with that theme, that Vygotsky's theory that learning depends on social interaction, that cognitive development is social. Consider, for instance, what kids learn when they interact with adults, right? They're learning different words. What kids learn when they're interacting with kids. At some age, kids may even have their own language that the adults don't understand, and they've developed that language themselves. Or how kids interact with, kids that interact with toys and other kids, right? So now you're taking theory of mind and you're using symbolic function of the toy, and then how kids interact with toys and adults, and the way that the adults influence the cognitive development of the children by the way a child plays with a toy, right? All of these things are about cognitive development and challenging the structures that are already there. A really important term that I'm pretty certain there's a quiz question about is this one right here. Yes, I know there is. Zone of proximal development. And what this means is it's Vygotsky's theory, and it's a theory about the relationship between social interaction and learning. And he theorizes that the zone of proximal development is the imaginary gap, is the gap between what a child or a person already knows and what they can do with a little bit of help. And so the term he uses here, he calls it scaffolding. And scaffolding is quite literally building the scaffold to help a child move from what they know up to the next level. What we know about learning is if a task is too difficult, and this is true for all of us, if a task is too difficult, we won't be successful at it because it's just too far beyond our reach. If, however, a task is too easy, we also won't be successful at it because, quite frankly, you're not learning anything, you're not growing. But what the zone of proximal development is, it's the space and what you can do. So think about examples of using the zone and scaffolding is that in order to learn multiplication, you first have to learn addition. And before you can learn algebra, you also have to learn multiplication and division and addition and subtraction. You wouldn't just go from learning counting to algebra. You have to learn the gaps in between. You learn your ABCs before you learn how to put your ABCs together into words. Before then, you learn how to write sentences, right? And those are examples of scaffolding. And so again, the significance of adults to help children is children play the role, and here's the word right here, of the more knowledgeable adults. Let me make sure I'm clear on that. Adults play the role of the more knowledgeable other. And in order for adults to be successful at being this more knowledgeable other, they have to also understand what a child already knows. So a successful guide that helps them scaffold, they begin by understanding what do you already know, and then how can I help you get to the next step. Think of it a little bit like prereq courses, right? You got to get the basics before you can move up to the next level. Okay, so that's zone of proximal development. Language. Let's talk about language development. Language is really, I think it's kind of abstract, but it's really incredible to think about the observation. And I believe the guy Noam Chomsky, he was a linguist. He knows lots of stuff. But for a while, his research on linguistics is he observed, and I don't think it's on here on this slide, is that children all over the world learn language and grammar and syntax in the same sequence. And a child by 3 years old, they will be producing sentences using proper grammar grammar and proper syntax without the explicit instruction of grammar and syntax. And children all over the world do it this way, and they learn language in a similar sequence. And he theorized that there was something called, oh man, right there, that there was something called a language acquisition device. And it was basically like a brain structure that enabled children to learn. One of the terms, I don't know if this is his term, he came up with is a concept called fast mapping. And fast mapping is the way, is the term that describes the very rapid vocabulary development of children and how they're learning a new word, about one word every 2 hours. By the time a child is 3 years old, they have 900 words that they can use. The textbook says by the time they're 6 years old, they have 2,600 words they can use, and they understand tens of thousands. And this, think about this. This is without like a vocabulary class, right? This is simply by being in the world and having people talk to them. So I want to emphasize the point again is that cognitive development depends on social interaction and depends on the adults talking to their children, interacting. Now, I don't want to suggest that it has to be verbal because interestingly enough, the left part of the brain where you have the language acquisition, like the Broca's region and the Wernicke, those are active even in sign language. So language, reading, spoken, and signed are all learned in the same parts of the brain. But we have to have this interaction. A couple other terms I think that are interesting, worth pointing out, is a term called private speech. And private speech is talking to ourselves. And so there's various theories of speculating why do children talk to their self. One may be it's a way of regulating, like this is what my husband does. I know we're not talking about children, but at home when he gets upset, he'll like go in the bathroom and he'll talk to himself. He'll talk out loud, but he'll be angry. And so it's a way that he self-regulates. Problem solving, I do a lot of talking to myself, problem solving, or in some cases it's practice. I know grown-ups that do this too. They have practice conversations, right? There's something heavy on their mind, so they will engage in private speech. They'll have this conversation in their car, but children do this too. And so this is a developmentally useful behavior. Pragmatics is just a fancy term for the skills of a conversation, and children learn this without explicit instruction. The more opportunities to practice conversation, the more they learn the give and take. This is where, going back to the theory of mind, if a child has theory of mind, people talk to them, they will learn the pragmatics of conversation. They will be more successful later on. Social speech is just a term given for using language to be understood and to understand. There's an interesting correlation with occupation and social class. And the use of language that the adults in the home use with their children. And I should change this because you don't have to be fluent, but parents, adults who use their words, like their words are their tool, will use more words at home, and they will use a different kind of vocabulary than children, say, who don't use their words. Adults who, and again, I don't like to use affluent because it's not about money, it's more about occupation. But adults who work in occupations where they don't, like my occupation is very vocabulary heavy. That's basically all my tools are my words, right? Or you are less likely to just use no, yes, and no and stop. So less educated households where there's fewer books, where there's less conversation about ideas, they use no and stop more. Basically, so this means that children are going to learn less sophisticated words. Speech is important to learning language, to learning how to read. Right? Of course, it's what we would call an emergent literary skill. So a child who learns to read, who is good at speech, has more vocabulary, it will be easier for them to learn to read. And I got to put a little plug in here. Sesame Street, in the textbook that I use, there's been some research done on Sesame Street, and because Sesame Street has historically, traditionally been sort of on the cutting edge of social issues, right? right? That children, when the research was done, who the research concluded that children who had had more opportunity to watch Sesame Street developed their language skills and their reading skills faster than children who didn't. And really, this goes back to the use of vocabulary. The use of words. The more we interact with children, the more words we use, the faster, the more opportunities they will have for cognitive development. And I'm going to stop right here. Well, the next lecture will be about social and emotional development of children in this age group.